Iran, officially the Islamic Republic of Iran, situated at the crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Arab states of the Middle East. And Iraq, officially the Republic of Iraq, sharing a border of nearly 1,450 kilometers with Iran to the east. Two countries, despite sharing almost the same name, which only differs by one letter, are two different cultures having different histories. Over the centuries, the relations between the Iranians and the Iraqis have deteriorated due to disputes over territory, which culminated in the Iran-Iraq War of 1980. Fueled by territorial, religious, and political disputes between the two nations, the war was one of the world's largest and longest conventional interstate wars, and only ended in an effective stalemate 8 years later. After Iraq became an independent nation in 1932, a major tension between Iraq and Iran was ignited over control of the Shatt al-Arab waters, the waterway formed by the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Shatt al-Arab rivers constitutes the border between Iraq and Iran on the last 50 miles of the river before flowing into the Persian Gulf, a Mediterranean Sea in the Middle East, between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, thus having strategic importance for both two nations. For Iran, the river is important for its transportation of crude oil. For Iraq, the river is its only access point to the Persian Gulf, thus playing a vital role in its transportation and exports. Therefore, both nations sought to claim their sovereignty over the river. In 1937, a pact was struck to put an end to their protracted battle. This treaty recognized Iran's border with Iraq along the low water east of Shatt al-Arab, leading to Iraq controlling most of this river. Iraq never recognized Iran's sovereignty over one half of the river and charged tolls for Iranian ships to move onto the Iraqi side of the river to reach the Persian Gulf. To defend its sovereignty rights over half of the Shatt al-Arab, in the 1960s, Iran began building up their military capacities, and in April 1969, it abrogated the Shatt al-Arab Treaty of 1937, claiming its sovereignty over half of the river, and Iranian ships ceased paying tolls to Iraq for passage through the river. Iraq, due to its weaker military capacity compared to Iran, had no choice but to accept Iran's position and scale up its own military. In the next few years, Iran provided support to the Kurdish insurgency in northern Iraq, successfully bringing Iraq back to the negotiation table. In 1975, a new agreement known as the Algiers Agreement was reached between the co-riparians, recognizing the co-sovereignty of Iran over the Shatt al-Arab in exchange for Iran's withdrawal of support for the Iraqi Kurdish movements. Another major change in the Iraqi-Iranian relationships came with the Iranian Revolution in 1979, which overthrew the Western-backed government of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and began the new Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a Shiite cleric. The tension between the two nations built rapidly when the new Iranian leader, Khomeini, fundamentally opposed the new Iraqi president, Saddam Hussein, and his ruling Ba'ath Party, calling on Islamists in Iraq to overthrow the government and establish an Islamic republic like Iran. Fearing an expanding Iranian revolution to Iraq and causing a Shia insurgency, Saddam sought to overturn the 1975 border agreements, reassert control over both sides of Shatt al-Arab, and expand Iraq's power as the leading nation in the Middle East. That's when the Iran-Iraq War was ignited. Given the weakness of the Iranian army after the revolution, Saddam decided to attack Iran. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi soldiers launched airstrikes on Iranian air bases, beginning the Iran-Iraq War. The attack was followed up by a ground invasion of the Khuzestan province, an oil-producing border region on the mainland. The invasion was initially successful, and by November, Iraq took control of Khorramshahr but failed to take the important oil refining center of Abadan. However, the fierce resistance of Iran stalled the Iraqi advance. Iran began to counterattack in 1981, and by June 1982, it had regained virtually all lost territory. Later that year, Iraq attempted to find peace by withdrawing its forces to pre-war borders, but Iran refused and continued the conflict in an attempt to topple Saddam's regime. In July 1982, Iran invaded Iraq's territory to gain control of Basra, the country's port city, but the attempt failed. Iraq, with the direct support from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and other Arab states, and tacit support from Western nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, employed more sophisticated weapons and a corps of better-trained officers. Meanwhile, Iran's only allies in the conflict were Syria and Libya. Therefore, Iraq's defenses remained resilient against the onslaught of Iran, protracting the war. Iraq continued its supposedly peaceful pursuits, but sparked international outrage for using chemical weapons against the Iranian troops and Iraqi Kurdish civilians. In the spring of 1988, taking the opportunity of Iran being severely damaged by repeated failures and attacks, Iraq launched its own ground attacks and won. In July of that year, the two countries agreed to accept an UN cooperative ceasefire under Security Council Resolution 598 that was passed in 1987. The war officially ended on August 20th, 1988. In August 1990, Iraq and Iran re-established diplomatic ties while Iraq was preoccupied with its invasion of its neighbor, Kuwait. Iraq accepted Iranian demands for the end of the war, including the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from the Iranian territory they had occupied, the division of sovereignty over the Shatt al-Arab waterway, and the exchange of prisoners of war. The Iran-Iraq War was one of the most catastrophic conflicts of the late 20th century, with the use of chemical weapons and frequent bombings, totaling the estimated casualties of both sides ranging from 1 million to twice that number and total economic loss of around $1.2 trillion. After the US overthrow of Saddam Hussein in 2003, and the eventual rise to power by pro-Iranian Shia factions, the Islamic Dawah Party and the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, ties between these two countries have been greatly improved, but mostly out of pragmatic interest. In March 2008, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became the first Iranian president to visit Iraq since Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran and Iraq became very close allies, supporting each other against the Islamic State, IS. Iran has given Iraq significant military support, which has given them significant political sway over Iraq's newly elected Shia government. From a foreign policy standpoint, a peaceful client is likely a top objective for Iran because Iraq largely depends on the more stable and developed Iran for its energy requirements. However, on September 7, 2018, Iraqi protests against perceived Iranian interference turned deadly when protesters set fire to the Iranian embassy in the southern Iraqi city of Basra. In April 2022, an agreement between Iraq and Iran was signed to resume Iranian gas deliveries to Iraq in exchange for Baghdad repaying its debts owed to Tehran. In June of that year, Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi said that Iran and Iraq had agreed to work toward the stability of the Middle East region. However, with the Middle East still reeling from further wars, insurgencies, and political turmoil, only time can tell whether any conflict will flare up in the future.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos of history.